The history of the NBA is full of players who could have been great, but whose careers didn't go as planned. This list isn't just for the talented people who never got their chance to shine because they wasted it. It's also for those who lost their talent too soon. Even though some of these stories are funny, the saddest ones deserve that bit of respect when we think about what could have been. Starting us off, Joe Alexander and Andrea Bargnani. Joe Alexander did it better than most players to go from being a big deal before the draft to being an afterthought in the NBA. Alexander had a good junior year at West Virginia. He impressed scouts with how fast and athletic he was. The Milwaukee Bucks took Alexander with the 8th pick in the 2008 NBA draft because they thought he had a high ceiling and high expectations. They wanted to help the forward improve his physical gifts. Alexander was talented, but he wasn't ready for the next level. He was too rough around the edges to ever be a factor. As a rookie, he came off the bench for 59 games before the Bucks sent him to the D-League. Alexander hasn't been on an NBA court since he was traded for John Salmons and Hakeem Warwick and played 8 terrible games for the Chicago Bulls. Andrea Bargnani is still getting paid a lot of money to show that people were wrong to compare him to Dirk Nowitzki. The prospect, who used to be called Il Mago, was supposed to be for Toronto what Dirk is for Dallas, a big man who was hard to guard and could score both near the basket and from outside the arc. Bargnani turned out to be a good three-point shooter, but his game is a mess in other ways. Even though he kept getting taller, he never got big enough to play at the highest level on the inside. So we ended up with the first overall pick in 2006, a player who can't defend and gets an average of 4.8 rebounds per game over his career. This isn't a case of unfair hype for a product that wasn't well scouted. Bargnani had everything he needed to be the next Dirk, but he just busted. Next, Michael Beasley and Jonathan Bender. Speaking of small steps forward that were disappointing in 2008, even though Derrick Rose was a great prospect, don't forget that Michael Beasley had one of the best freshman seasons in NCAA history and could have been the first pick. Beasley came in and carried the Kansas State Wildcats on his back. He averaged 26.2 points and 12.4 rebounds per game right away. Even though he brought his ability to score with him to the NBA, he has gotten worse and worse each season. Right now, he is shooting less than 40% from the field for the Phoenix Suns. Beasley, on the other hand, has only been good at one thing. He isn't big enough or fast enough to rebound at this level, and on defense, he doesn't care or know what to do. Any points he gets are canceled out by the chances he gives. Next, here's our first lesson from the time when players went from high school to the NBA draft. When the Indiana Pacers saw that they could trade Antonio Davis, a good big man, for Jonathan Bender, a 7-footer who was also athletic, they made the deal on draft day in 1999. After giving young Bender 2 years to get used to things, Indiana saw glimpses of what he could be in 2001 and 2002. Bender used the fact that he had played in 78 games and still had room to grow to get a 4-year contract extension, after which he got hurt right away. The once promising player played in 57 games over the next 2 years, but only 9 over the next 2. Aside from a brief attempt to come back with the New York Knicks in 2009-10, Bender's career didn't live up to the early promise it showed. Moving on to Len Bias and Sam Bowie. Len Bias will always be thought of as a lost NBA legend. When the Boston Celtics took him with the 2nd pick in the draft in 1986, he was the future. Bias was 6'8" and could jump out of the gym and was good enough at his game to make the most of his physical skills. He was going to take Larry Bird's place in Boston and become Red Auerbach's new star player. What happened next was one of the most shocking things to ever happen in sports. 2 days after the draft, someone died of a drug overdose. Bias was gone in an instant, and the 22-year bright Olds future ended just as he was starting to look forward to it. He could have been the next great Celtics player, but he made a bad choice. Instead, Len Bias is known as one of the best basketball players who never played. Sam Bowie wasn't a bust just because he was picked before Michael Jordan. He could have been a bust on his own, since Clyde Drexler was already in town, and the team needed to replace Bill Walton, who was always hurt. They chose Bowie instead of MJ. There was a plan behind drafting for need, even though it put the Blazers on a path that was all too familiar. After a promising rookie season, Bowie broke down. Since high school, the young center had been having trouble with leg injuries. In 3 straight seasons, he broke his left leg, his right leg, and his right tibia. The rest of his career, Bowie was a good center, but he never lived up to what he showed as a rookie. With that history of injuries, Bowie might have been a bad pick in any draft. The Jordan comparison does nothing but make his name even worse. Next up, Sean Bradley and Kwame Brown. Now that we all know, being 7'6" is not enough to make you a great NBA player. Sean Bradley could have been the dominant center everyone thought he could be if he had just improved one part of his game. Bradley was a twig, which was too bad. He was naturally good at blocking shots, but smaller and stronger players could push him out of position when he was trying to grab a rebound. On the offensive end, he had the same problem. He didn't have a good post game, so he didn't have many options if he couldn't get right to the basket. So the number 2 pick in the 1990 1993 NBA draft became something like a sideshow. With his size and defensive presence, Bradley could sometimes take over a game, but most of the time he was just a very bad player. Kwame Brown is living proof that raw talent isn't everything. He was the first high school player to be picked first overall in the draft. When Michael Jordan's Washington Wizards picked him up in 2001, Brown already had the skills to do well in the NBA, but he had been using them to beat up weaker high school players. Brown failed when he had to play against people his own size. In his third season, he averaged 10.9 points and 7.4 rebounds per game, which are still his career highs even though he is still playing. Brown is still on the team only because he has accepted his role as a backup player. Brown has been able to make a career because he has grown up and learned to be humble. Maybe it wouldn't have been so hard for him if he had played more ball in college and improved his skills. Finally, Eddie Curry and Pervis Ellison. When Eddie Curry went from high school to the pros in 2001, he was picked just 3 spots after Brown. His career has had both higher and lower highs and lows. Back in the early 2000s, when he played for the Baby Bulls, Curry used his strength and size to control the inside of the court. That made the New York Knicks notice him, and he was at his best for them before his size started to hurt him. Curry got out of shape and didn't work hard enough in New York, so his weight went up and he was taken out of the starting lineup and out of the rotation. The weight gain also led to some injuries that kept coming back, which made Curry a nobody for the rest of his career. Curry helped the Miami Heat win the NBA championship in 2012 from the bench, but he still has the same problems. At this point, the only way for him to make it as a professional basketball player is to ride on someone else's coattails. Never nervous. Before he went to the NBA, Pervis Ellison had 4 great years at Louisville. Before his body gave out, he only had 1 game as a pro. Ellison was picked first overall by the Sacramento Kings in 1989, but he was hurt and only played 34 games. His teammates called him out-of-service Pervis because he was hurt so much. 2 years later, he played for the Washington Bullets and averaged 20 points, 11.4 rebounds, and 2.68 blocks per game, but his nickname, Kings, was a good one. Ellison had knee problems for the rest of his career, which turned him from a rising star to a backup player who was rarely even available. The last straw was when Ellison broke his toe in a moving accident. This kept him out of all but 39 games from 1996-97 to 98-99. He won the Most Improved Player award for that great season, but if he had been healthy, he could have won a lot more. Well, that's it for today, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Till next time, cheers.